in a sleeve, you talk about one particular person, Julia Parker. And in fact, you actually reference her a little bit as you go on about the story as well, how she was murdered in 91, I believe. So, how did these crimes, that these white collar crimes that happened in the late 60s, early like in the 70s, how did they lead to like the higher murder rates in the late 80s and early 90s, at least until Mayor Giuliani came and basically cleared the city up?
So my book is two threads. One is East New York and its decline, and the other is the FHA scandal occurring, the investigation, arrest, and prosecution. So they start roughly in the same time, and I wanted to connect to the unsolved murder. So I picked one unsolved murder to feature in the book, and that was Julia Parker, a 17-year-old girl, as you said, who was murdered in 19, was it 91? Close to that. And
91, yeah.
so she was born in 1974, I believe. So I show her being born in New York, and I just constantly throughout the whole book go back and forth as the trial and prosecution proceeds. I show East New York declining, and I show exactly why I think the two are connected. So even though the FHA chapters stop in the 1970s for the most part, and the East New York chapters continue into the 1990s and beyond. Because I want people to, as I'm showing the neighborhood decline, I'm showing why, and I want them to go back constantly to it's because of this, it's because of this, it's because of this, and I show why, even though I'm going beyond 1970, it's still because of this, and I very, very carefully show each thing degrading, when, and what was the response to things declining and the lack of response, and directly connecting it to these foreclosed buildings. It's hard for me to explain in a
Yeah, yeah.
thing what took me a book to outline, but trust me, the connection is there. I mean, I invite anyone to show me where I'm deluded or wrong.
Yeah, I know. Obviously, you focus on Julia Parker, but as you say,
I showed Julia Parker, she was born into a neighborhood that was already in decline, but her family happened to get, 2 buildings on a block that was nice. And so I show East New York, just declining and getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer until finally there's a crack house on her block. And all of this, like, the street crime arose because of the degradation of the neighborhood, and then the response from the city and from the police department, and all departments whose responsibility was to address the problems occurring in East New York, never adequately responded.
one thing I forgot to ask you, because we've talked about mortgages and you briefly mentioned about rent as well. What was the social housing like? Was there any social housing back then? In regard, because obviously what you said is talk about mortgages. Was there any what was the social housing like back then? Because it seems to me a lot of it back then was over mortgages or privately rented. Was that the case back then, or was it more?
What are you counting as social housing?
So how is it probably different from here in America and the UK? But in the UK, you have like a certain number of houses that are basically run by councils, i.e., like counties, so to speak. Is there something similar in America where you have like certain like houses that are like built by, I don't know, a city, so people can go in there if like they're struggling for housing, or like I don't know how best to
We don't really have a good solution to these housing difficulties in the
yeah,
United
yeah, yeah.
States. But for in the beginning of the book, homelessness was um not really a problem yet. I'm not saying there were people without homes, but there weren't people without homes. There were, but it was very few. So they had shelters, but the shelters were these dangerous, awful places. And at one point, I forget the year, but Andrew Cuomo was the head of HUD, and he came up with this idea that instead of shelters, which were these just large rooms, open rooms filled with cots, to have buildings with apartments for families that needed housing.